Last October, I ran the 49th running of the Marine Corps Marathon, and today I wanted to do a quick recap of that race, going over everything from the logistics of how I actually got to the race start line, the race itself, and then giving an overview of the race course. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so before I actually get into the recap of the 2024 Marine Corps Marathon, I do want to go over a few things. First, if you are not aware or have not watched any video prior, I actually had sustained an injury 6 weeks prior to the running of the Marine Corps Marathon. I basically tried to do everything I could to get myself to the start line as healthy as possible. And unfortunately, as you'll see in the race recap, that did not happen at about mile 21. Well, actually at about mile 8, the injury kind of started to show up. And then by mile 21, I completely fell apart. So when we're going over the race recap and kind of talking about everything with the race course, I will say mile 20 or 21 to the finish line are almost an absolute blur. So trying to talk about the race course in terms of hey, this is what you should expect running it, I'm not gonna remember almost any of that because, to be honest, I was doing everything I could to just stay mentally locked in, to even keep one foot in front of the other, because I was in complete shambles. And partly one of the reasons it took me so long to do this recap video is once I had completed the race, I was pretty depressed, to be honest, mainly because I had been doing that run streak and running for the Semper Fi Fund. I was running to honor all my fallen brothers who I had served with while I was in the Marine Corps. And regardless of the time, that isn't as big of an issue on the sub 3 hour time. It was more that I really felt like I let a lot of people down by not completing basically getting injured and then knowing that I wasn't going to be able to complete that 1 year run streak that I had set out to do. So basically, I was no longer going to be true to my word of being able to run every single day for an entire year with the Marine Corps flag. So I felt really upset about that. And then I was also just upset because in the race, it didn't go as planned, which that happens all the time. That's nothing new. But I felt like there was that extra burden of carrying the weight of trying to honor my fallen brothers in that race, and then also representing the Semper Fi Fund as an organization who has helped me in the past and helps other veterans with veteran assistance. I just feel like I let a lot of people down. So I was extremely upset, depressed, whatever you want to call it. And immediately after that race, there was pretty much that I'm gonna make this race video and then I'm just done making videos. I was kind of done with everything. I was really upset. And then as some time went on and I was able to kind of process it more, I realized, okay, maybe I do enjoy making videos. I do enjoy talking about running. So I'll kind of keep making videos in 2025. I just don't know if I'll make a recap. And then as more time went on, like I said, kind of being able to process it more and more, I realized I actually do want to make a recap and kind of talk about everything. It's kind of good to go over all of the accomplishments and not only focus on the negatives from that day, because there was a lot that I'm very proud of with the running of the Marine Corps Marathon in 2024, which I'll start with the first thing I'm extremely proud of, and that is even being able to finish in the first place. And then another thing I'm actually extremely proud of is that in 2024, along with the run streak, I had set out to run the Semper Fidelis Challenge. It's the 17.75K race that's early in the year. And then you have the Marine Corps Historic Half, which is in the spring, I believe it's May. And then you have the Marine Corps Marathon, which is in October. I ran all 3 of those races. And so at the very end, when you get the medal, they have a thing, which I'm kind of all over the place here, but actually when you're running the race, if you're doing one of the challenges and or are setting out to do something above and beyond just running the Marine Corps Marathon, on your race bib, you'll actually have something up above here that states what you're doing. So as you can see, Semper Fidelis Challenge was on my bib for 2024, which means when I actually went to the finish line, went through the finish line and went to receive my medal, you get the EGA, the normal Marine Corps Marathon medal first, And then near the end, I got the Semper Fidelis challenge. So they basically saw that my bib had that. So on top of that, I got this medal as well. And then the Marine Corps Marathon, even though I missed my goal of running a sub 3 hour marathon, considering I was dealing with an injury from mile 8 on and 21 fell apart completely, I was still able to run a 3:07:04, which is still a PR in the marathon for me. And it's still a very respectable time in the marathon when you look at the whole grand scheme of things. So yes, I may have missed my goal that I'd set out for myself, but honestly, apart from me, no one else really cares about how fast you run a marathon. They really are just impressed that you can run a marathon in the first place. And so running a 3:07:04 is still a huge accomplishment. Yeah, I didn't get my goal. Yeah, I feel like I let a lot of people down, but there still is a lot to celebrate. All right, so with all of that out of the way, let's actually get into the recap of the Marine Corps Marathon. I'm gonna start with the logistics of actually getting to the start line. When I actually stayed in DC, I stayed down in the wharf area. So I took the L'Enfant, or however you say it, L'Enfant Plaza Metro. And as you can see, you have the silver, orange, and blue line to actually get to the station you're getting to, which is the Rosslyn Metro station. So this is where you want to go no matter which way you're taking the Metro. There's a multitude of ways to get to the start line from the Metro. So whichever area you're staying in within DC, there's probably a Metro station near you that you can use to take to get to the Rosslyn station. If I remember correctly, the plaza or the first train ran at 5. My wife and I got on the first train we could get to make sure we got to Rosslyn. It is a couple of blocks from the Rosslyn station to actually walk to where the security starts, because it's down here in the US Marine Corps War Memorial. Like I said, you can take the Metro. We got a 3-day pass. It was relatively inexpensive. You can use it to be able to go all over DC. We arrived Thursday, we got the pass Friday, and we're able to use it all the way to Sunday, which was super nice. So it was a perfect thing if you're new to like myself, if you've never been to DC before, this is a great option. Get the 3-day Metro pass. You can use it on the day of race day. And like I said, use the Metro to get to Rosslyn Station. Yes, you'll have to walk a few blocks, but it's no big deal. You can even use that as a warm-up if you really want to. Honestly, 5 to when the race started, that would have been too early for a warm-up, so my wife and I just walked. But it was pretty cold that morning, so maybe you want to run to just warm up your body. With the logistics, one thing I do want to kind of note is that since I was running with the Semper Fi Fund, I didn't go to the normal staging area that most runners would go to. I was actually able to go and utilize Charity Village, which had a bunch of different organizations who are, charitable organizations working with the Marine Corps Marathon organization. So if you are looking to run the Marine Corps Marathon and you want to run with the charity organization, run with the Semper Fi Fund. It's a great organization to run for. I'm running with the Semper Fi Fund again this year for the 50th running of the Marine Corps Marathon. And if you aren't looking to run at all, but you do want to support the Semper Fi Fund and me running with them, I'll have a link down below in the description. But either way, like I said, I was in Charity Village. It is nice. You have your own set of porta potties. One thing I will say that's also unique to my situation with running with the Semper Fi Fund, or at least my experience this time around, which I'll actually get into with the race, is that when you're looking at the actual race course here, you'll see the start line is right by the Arlington National Cemetery. And the thing about, like I said, the unique part was that I was running with Andrew, the midlife runner, and he was a seated runner and I was not, based on whatever your times you submit. And so one thing they're doing now, at least I believe this was the first year they're implementing it, I do not know, but from what Andrew told me, basically they were allowing a tent for seated runners to be able to go and sit before the race, similar to like sub-elite, elite runners. And then when you actually get to the staging area, the start line staging area, there's 2 lanes that the Marine Corps Marathon starts on with like 2 giant inflatables. You'll see it in the video if you go back and watch my vlog of the race. I kind of snuck in to the seated runner side. I went with Andrew. Someone had led us basically with Andrew. Like someone had led all the seated runners to the start line, and there was a Marine who was guarding like an area. It was blocked off, and the guy was like, "Oh, these are all seated runners," and he was like, "Okay." He didn't check any of the bibs, so a bunch of us, they were all seated runners, I think, except me. So a bunch of us just like got through this area. And so this gets to the part of like the starting line with the experience, is that when we got to the starting line, there was like the 2 lanes. We were on the left side lane heading out of the start line, and there wasn't that many people. Like there was people scattered throughout, but there was not that many people on the left side because it was mainly all elites and then seeded runners. So it was basically elite and sub-elite people. So Andrew and I get there and we're like looking for the 3-hour pacer to at least have an understanding of like, who should we be like recognizing. Both of us knew we weren't going to be running with a 3-hour pacer, at least for the first few miles. And then we would kind of figure it out logistically as the race was going on. But we couldn't find any pacers at all. And we're like, this is so weird. Like there's no pacers. They sent out an email saying there would be pacers. It was on the website, whatever. I guess we'll just stick together and kind of like see how things go. But like I said, this is kind of unique to this experience, because on the right-hand side, as I will find out, or I did find out later in the race, the right-hand side was basically all the normal runners who weren't seeded or elite. And all of the pacers, to my understanding, must have been on the right-hand side, primarily because I eventually found the 3-hour pacer on the race course, which means the 3-hour pacer must have been over on the regular side, and they just assumed seeded runners, elite runners don't really need pacers. So for those of you looking to run the Marine Corps Marathon either this year and or in future events, just know if you are a seeded runner, you're not going to get any of that support if you're looking to run with a pacer. If you want to make sure you're running with a pacer, just make sure you're on the right-hand side when you start the race. Another thing that was really odd about being on that left-hand side is, like I said, since it was scattered out, Andrew and I stood near the like inflated pillar that said, I think 3 to 3:30 or whatever. I can't remember what it said exactly. I'd have to go back and watch the vlog. But we stood like in the area where we thought sub 3 would be, or 3-hour would be. And it never really filled up. And so then all of a sudden, the announcers, they're going through all of the kind of like formalities before, you know, the national anthem, all of those things. And then we're realizing that like, I think the race is starting. Like we're pretty far from the actual start line. And we're realizing that like, okay, I think the race is starting and like this just isn't filling up. And so we just kind of started inching forward, and then the cannons went off or whatever went off to start. And we realized like, oh no, we got to get going. Like the race is starting. We still have quite a distance between us and like the actual start line. So like the gun time or chip time versus clock time is going to be off as we pass clocks later, which is just, it's never fun to be far off of the, like your chip time off of clock time, because it can mess with you mentally as you get further in the race and you see what the clock has versus maybe what your goal is, and you don't know if it's matched with the chip time. If you've run a marathon before, you understand all of that, like mentally can affect you in the late miles when you start to struggle. Either way, just be aware, if you're gonna run the Marine Corps Marathon, if you're on the left-hand side and it seems like it's pretty scattered out, just ignore the pillars and try and get as far up to the front as possible, because it's not gonna fill up. But either way, let's actually get into the race now, and I'll explain why we did not plan on running with the sub 3-hour pacer through the first few miles. And that's primarily because if you look at the race up till basically, what is it, mile 5-ish, you have this extremely big hill going through Arlington. And then you have a big overpass going up into Georgetown. And then it pretty much flattens out for the rest of the race. You have some little rollers here and there. It gets a little hilly through this last little bit of the race. You have a nice downhill when you start the race, but then you have some extreme uphills throughout that first half. And so Andrew and I had the strategy of basically trying to go out reserved and then finding the pace somewhere here at like mile 6 or mile 7 and kind of settling into a better pace to then try and catch either the sub 3 and or get below that 3-hour. And so if you look here, even at my splits, you'll see I have a 7:03, 7:05, 7, and then there's that 6:17 at mile 4, which there's no surprise if you're looking here at mile 4. It's like a huge downhill, which this is nice. You have quite a bit of an uphill gain. Like it's a lot more than I expected, because even when you're looking at the map prior to the race and then you're reading like how much elevation it should be, you're like, oh, that shouldn't be too bad. But when you're in the race, and you're thinking like, okay, this is really early in the race and it could potentially be taxing a lot of energy that I'll like basically have to kind of cash in on later. Like this, you start to realize like, man, these hills are a little more than I was expecting. So just be prepared if you're gonna run the Marine Corps Marathon, miles 1 through 4, until you get that downhill, like you're gonna really be feeling it. But this downhill is nice. It's very long. And as you can see, I was running quite a fast pace, even for the average. And you see I have 167 feet negative, or net negative 167. So like that's really good. But even if you come here and look at my kind of pace throughout and the elevation gain, you can see my pace, like I'm almost hitting 744. So like I'm almost hitting 8-minute miles here, 744, 735. The main thing I actually really focused on here was more where my heart rate was than what my pace was. So the one thing I wanted to make sure was keeping my heart rate somewhere in like that 165 to 175 range. I really didn't want it to get close to threshold, which is 178 for me. I didn't want to get it near that threshold, or if it did get near the threshold, like here, 180, you see I'm at the very top. Let me actually turn the heart rate off here real quick. As you can see, I'm at the very top of the hill here. And so obviously my heart rate's gonna be extremely high. Oh, of course it gets rid of heart rate now. As you can see, my heart rate's gonna be really high here at the top of the hill, 177, 180. I thought I saw it, yeah, 180 and 735. But I'm kind of cresting the hill. And so that's expected when you're running a big hill, and especially one where you've actually been running the hill for quite some time. Like it's not like a quick hill either. That is expected. It really was, where does my heart rate drop to once I'm done with the hill? That was another thing that I was really focusing on. And if you're gonna run like a heart rate strategy for any marathon, the real concern isn't what does your heart rate get to on the hills relative to effort. The real concern is when you have kind of done the hill and you're on like a downhill or back on a flat, does your heart rate go back to what a normal would be in your race condition? So as you can see here, I'm right back down into the high 160s, low 170s, and pretty much stays stable throughout. So if you're going to run that strategy of focusing on heart rate and your effort through the hills, then just make sure, like I said, don't worry too much about pace. You have a ton of time to make up that ground if you have a goal you're looking for. Really focus more on that heart rate. And if you're not gonna focus on heart rate, or you don't really trust the data from your watch or whatever monitor you have on, the next best thing would be RPE, or like relative perceived effort. I believe that's what RPE stands for. But like, what is your perceived effort through this beginning? Because like I said, the last thing you wanna do is do anything that's gonna basically, you're gonna be cashing a check that you can then no longer actually afford later in the race. But honestly, a good race at the Marine Corps Marathon is all predicated in your strategy in these first few miles. Because like I said, it's gonna be, the hills are, like I said, for me, a little more aggressive than I thought they would be. The one good thing about this is you do get a lot of good crowd support actually through all of this, even in like Georgetown up here. As you'll see, Georgetown through here, when you're in like mile 4 and 5, like you actually have a lot of good crowd support. There's good crowd support both on the sides of the road, and then you actually have a lot of overpasses through this area where there'll be people on the overpass as well. So you get a lot of good crowd support. There's still a lot of runner support as well. Like the crowds haven't thinned out in terms of runners, because the two sides that I'm talking about, you eventually merge. So eventually you're all together anyways by like this hill. And so the one nice thing is you're merged. You have a lot of people to kind of lock in with during this and kind of find someone or a group to lock in with if you find you have a perceived effort that feels good. I did that myself. I lost Andrew almost immediately. I actually don't know what he was doing on his strategy. I know Andrew was really struggling as well coming into this race with overtraining, and just he had a lot of things going on. So I know both Andrew and I went in with a lot of reservations about how the race would actually go versus what we were hoping for. And so I lost Andrew almost immediately. He kind of like booked off and did his own thing. I did eventually catch him somewhere in here, if I remember correctly. I think I caught him right before we went into Georgetown. I ended up locking in with a runner, Bailey, who lived in the DC area, but was originally from Michigan. So we had kind of connected over that. Bailey had reached out prior to the Marine Corps Marathon. So it was cool to run. I actually ran with Bailey for quite a bit of the race. If you go and watch the vlog, you'll see Bailey throughout a lot of the race. But either way, like I said, you will eventually merge the two. So even if you start on the seated runner side, you will eventually merge with other runners who could potentially be running the pace you're looking at running for the majority of the race, or at least through these first parts. It's really nice that you get a lot of crowd support through here. And then you cross this overpass. So this is that next like big hill before it flattens out, where you get into Georgetown. And now you actually go up into, it looks like Columbia Heights, Cleveland Park, Glover Park area. And so this part of the race, you'll see you do basically like a 180 to come back. So you do like an out and back to then come back into downtown DC. In the vlog, this part of the area is the like highly vegetated area. So you're kind of running down this major highway. You're running like east, basically you're running north out of DC or downtown DC. And you're running on like it's like an uneven area where you have one heading north and then you have another highway, the opposite highway coming back south into DC. And so you run north and then you do the 180 and you come back south. So if you watch in my vlog, you'll notice that there's a lot of areas where you can either see runners running out who are earlier or they're farther back in the race going towards that 180. And then myself coming back. So when I'm going out, you can see runners coming back this way. And then when I'm coming back, I kind of highlight some of the runners. And then you notice areas where the highway merges and you can see runners kind of going back and forth. So again, even in this area where you're doing the out and back, you have not a lot of crowd support. Like it's pretty empty through here in terms of crowd support, but you still have the ability of a lot of runners, even if you're by yourself through this area, which I believe I kind of was by myself through this area, because as you can see, I'd picked up the pace and I'd set into basically what would be the sub 3 pace of 645, 650 through this area. And so I had set into a pace that I believe was a little faster than most of the runners I was around because of this, like taking it slower through the hill. And so I was pretty routinely through the rest of the race. I pretty much was passing people almost through the rest of the race until I completely fell apart at 21. And then I started getting passed. But up until this point, like I said, I was pretty much passing people. So I was always by myself, but I wasn't always by myself, if that makes sense, because one, I was passing people. And then secondly, you had a lot of that, like when you're going out, you have people coming back. So there's still runners kind of by you. And then when you're coming back, you have people going out. So there's always other runners helping kind of keep you distracted from the fact that all of the nerves have kind of worn off, the adrenaline is worn off, and now you need to kind of like set in and set the goal of like just finishing the race. And so that's just one thing to note through here, is that even though it's an out and back and there's not much crowd support, you still have a good majority or good chunk of runner support. And then basically as you come through, you start to come back into DC, you actually run down into the Potomac Park, I think East Potomac Park. And this is where the half marathon portion will be. This is where you'll actually hit the half marathon marker. And this is also where the Blue Mile is. It's basically an entire mile of service members who have passed away. They'll be on either side. It's all in blue. And then at the very end of that mile, there'll be a ton of basically the organization's like volunteers holding American flags on both sides, cheering you on. It's a very heavy mile, to say the least. I said the same thing about the historic half the first time I experienced it. And then the Marine Corps Marathon was no different. But here, like I said, you get in, and then even where the volunteers are, like it's really close. It's kind of cool because you get through this tunnel. They're all cheering you on. It's right before the half marathon. So you hopefully are feeling really good still at this point in the race. I know I was. Like I said, at mile 8, I was already feeling the injury. So right around here is where I started to feel the injury. I actually wonder if doing the 180 maybe is what started to aggravate it a little more. I don't know. I started to feel it. It was like a tightening, and it hurt the rest of the time, but it was light enough that I thought maybe I could squeak by. Like maybe somehow I could just edge it out. You hear all the time of people who are like, the day wasn't my day, and somehow they end up getting a PR. So that was my thought from mile 8 on, was like, I don't know, maybe I can squeak it by. And so here, same thing, like I was feeling it, but I still felt good enough. Like it was like, okay, I hit the half in exactly what I wanted to. If we move down here and look, I was still running really good paces. If anything, I was actually starting to cut my pace down. I was trying to make sure I was under that 3. But either way, one thing to note, like I said, you have the Blue Mile coming here. And then actually another thing to note, coming back through the East Potomac Park, it's all flat through here, but you will get heavy wind through this backside, like running up through the wharf. You will get some wind. So I'm pretty sure the wind's to your back here, and then it's to your front here. So you're running into headwind, which is never fun, especially when you start to get into those later miles where you might be starting to have the onset of fatigue. But just be aware you're gonna get wind through here. And then this is what I would argue is the best part of the entire race. It's the best crowd support you're gonna get through the entire race. Plus it's kind of all of the coolest parts of being in DC and getting to run DC all in like one thing. So you get out of the park and you kind of run out and you do this little like out and back, and then you come in, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so you're coming through here, you run on the back side of the Lincoln Memorial. Sorry, I had to remember because it's kind of overwhelming, right? Like you come out of the park, you run over the bridge, and it's just, it's a lot going on through here. So you run out, you run on the backside of the Lincoln Memorial, and then you get to run down through basically what's the stretch of like the Washington Monument, all of the museums, and then you run down and you actually get to come in front of Capitol Hill. So you like run in front of the Senate building, all of that fun stuff. Like this is definitely the best part. There's a ton of crowd support. Like it's crazy because on the backside of the Lincoln Memorial, they have like stairs running down. There's people all along the stairs. If you watch the vlog, you'll notice through this area, it's an insane amount of crowd support. Plus it's really easy for spectators here. I know this is pretty much where my wife went. Like she started here, walked across this bridge. She was able to see me here and then here and then here. She was able to see me like 3 or 4 times, basically in the span of a few miles. So if you're a spectator or you have people who are coming out, this is a really good area for them to come because they're going to be able to catch you at multiple times, because they could potentially catch you coming into the park. They could catch you coming out of the park. They can catch you over here going up towards Capitol Hill and then back down towards Capitol Hill before you go off to finish the race, like whichever way you go. Oh yeah, you come down into Crystal City. But either way, if you have family or friends coming to watch you, that's a great area for them to potentially be able to see you multiple times like my wife did. Up here is where I actually caught the sub 3. So somewhere in here I could see like a pacer up in the distance, and I was like, oh, they exist. Like the pacer exists. This is amazing. Yes, like I can finally go and actually maybe catch up and kind of slow down, because as you see through here, my pace was getting a little hot of what I needed for sub 3, and I hadn't seen a pacer yet, so I had no idea what my chip time was versus the clock time, because I knew when I was passing Matt's for the clock time that my chip time was going to be a little off because of how I said the start. We were pretty far from the start line. So I knew my chip time was off, but I didn't know how much my chip time was off. It's so crazy through here that I wasn't really paying attention to like my watch's total time. I wasn't doing the fast math. Let's just put it that way. Like I wasn't doing the fast math with watch's total time versus what the chip time was, like the clock time was saying. So I wasn't really sure, but I saw the pacer and was like, okay, cool. I'll catch the 3-hour pacer and then I'll just slow down a little bit. You know what I mean? Like obviously I still need to be running the paces to finish out the last few miles at the sub 3 pace. And then once we get into here, I was like, I'll pick up the pace and kind of let the sub 3 group, like I'll leave the sub 3 group to try and give myself some extra time just in case the 3-hour pacer wasn't running a good race. I caught the 3-hour pacer as you make like the wide circle to run around basically where the Capitol Hill is in the Senate building. You kind of run around and then you come back down through here and then you run off over a big overpass past the East Potomac Park. So like that overpass goes over, the park is down below, and then there's this overpass that goes over, and then you come back down into Crystal City. Now, this is where I started to fall off. You can see my pace slowly start. So it was about mile 20 where my injury really started to set in. So basically, like I said, I caught the 3-hour pacer, came back through here. You still have good crowd support. And then, like I said, as far as I can remember, I was starting to really zone out here. But as far as I can remember, crowd support gets really weak through the rest of the race, pretty much up until right here, where you kind of come into this last little area for the finish line back through the National Cemetery. So you kind of come back through where the start line is, and then you do the end. But through here, like after you come out, you kind of go from like the highest of highs to the lowest of lows in terms of crowd support and just where you're at in the race. Like for me personally, this is where I was struggling the most because my injury was to the point that it was starting to really hurt, where I knew I would not be able to sustain the paces I was running. And as you can see with my pace and heart rate, they really fall off here coming through Crystal City. And like I said, I don't really remember much through here. So I apologize that I can't give a good recap from basically 20 on, but there's not much to note. As you can see, you come down into Crystal City and it's still pretty flat. You kind of have some little like rollers throughout, but it's nothing crazy. And then you do a 180, which I actually don't remember that. Like that's where I was at. Like I don't actually remember doing a 180 there, like an out and back. I'm actually trying to remember what that even was here. And then you basically come up through Crystal City, back up through the Arlington National Cemetery. You can see the elevation. Like I said, I'm not gonna really touch it much because as you can see, like here, I'm almost running a 10-minute mile at this point. My heart rate's down at 136 because I'm basically walking. At this point in the race, I was honestly to the point, I was in so much pain. I was contemplating walking and or just stopping the race altogether. The only reason I did not stop was because of the fact that I was running with the Marine Corps flag. I was running to honor my fallen brothers, and I was running with the Semper Fi Fund. I am not kidding when I say this would have been my first marathon DNF if it was not for that. I was that close to just stopping altogether because I knew the pain was so bad. I knew that there was a chance by me continuing, especially when like you have a couple miles to go. It's not like I have a few hundred meters and I can just kind of tough it out. Like I knew I had quite a few miles to go here, and I knew I could potentially be doing irreparable damage with how bad the pain was coming out of like Crystal City back into Arlington. And honestly, I just kept saying to myself, this is for my brothers. I was actually like mumbling it. So I'm pretty sure anyone who passed me was like, man, that guy is in a dark place. Cause I'm like mumbling to myself. I have like the 1,000-yard stare. Like I had tunnel vision. Like I couldn't see what was going on. I was so out of it. I don't know how I actually got through these miles other than that. Like I said, I was just telling myself like, I need to finish. I cannot dishonor my brothers in this way. I cannot dishonor the Semper Fi Fund by like DNFing. And so, like I said, all of this is an absolute blur. The only thing I do remember is here. I had always heard that you finish on an uphill, but I had no idea what the uphill was gonna look like. Cause when you look at the elevation map, you don't really, you just see like, okay, it's kind of an uphill. Like it doesn't look that bad. And honestly, it's a short uphill, but basically you'll come in, you'll hit mile 26. There's like a giant thing painted on the road. And there's actually like a crane or something, like there's an awning system above where there's photographers and it kind of says like, smile, you're on camera or something along those lines. I do vividly remember that because like I said, through here, I had kind of, zoned out, but knowing I'd hit mile 26 really helped me to be able to kind of lock in. Cause you can even see my pace like picks up quite drastically here. So I knew like, okay, I got to pick it up and at least finish somewhat strong. Like I have no idea what my time is at this point. I don't even care about a PR. Like I don't care about any of that. I just care about finishing. And so seeing that photographer, like I was like, okay, I gotta pick it up at least a little bit. And then the hill, it's not that bad actually. So you're back in the area in the Arlington Cemetery where it's split. Basically you're on the right-hand side and they have you kind of like turn into the hill that you will run up. You run up a hill. It's pretty short actually. Like if you look, it's an 8% grade, but it's steep, but it's short. Like it doesn't last very long. And then what you do is you come up the hill and you turn and then there's basically like a straight shot to the finish line. It was one of those, like I said, I was so out of it. I finished the hill, I turned, I had nothing left. My wife even said she knew something had to be wrong because she could see it on my face. Like as soon as I turned, that like I came into view up the hill and turned, she could tell something was like really wrong because of how I looked and how I was moving. Like there was no kick, there was no nothing left in me. And I finished in a 3:07:04. My moving time was a 3:07:07. That's roughly a 7:02, 7:03 pace. The PR on Strava is a 3:04:14. So woohoo! I mean, your watch is always going to be faster than whatever the actual race is. So all of my like Strava PRs are always faster than what my actual race PR, like the official PR is. I set a PR on the 30K. That's cool. I set a PR on these random segments, so that's cool. Total elevation was 764 feet for the entire race. I burnt roughly 3,100 calories, almost 3,200 calories. Elapsed time, as you can see, same thing, 3:07:07. So there was no stopping the watch, all of that fun stuff. I ran with the Coros Pace 3, so that was what recorded this. So the variations you can see, that was from the Pace 3 recording. I did have a foot pod as well. It didn't help as much as I thought it would in terms of like having the mile tangents be closer to like if I just ran with a watch versus having a foot pod that's supposed to be more accurate. It didn't really help at all. It honestly, I could have gone without it and it would have literally changed nothing with my race. And then I ran in the Asics Metaspeed Sky Paris, for those of you who are wondering what shoe I ran in. But that is it for the race recap. I know this was an extremely long video. Thank you to everyone who has stuck around for the entire recap. If you have any more questions about the Marine Corps Marathon, the race course leading up to the marathon, leave the questions down in the comments or go follow me over on Instagram and just DM me over there as well. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. If you're running the Marine Corps Marathon and you want to run with the Semper Fi Fund, like I said, check it out. I have a link down in the description. You can look at it and see if that's an organization you want to run to. If not, you can donate to the cause with the link down in the description. And then lastly, if you are running the 50th Marine Corps Marathon, I would love to meet up with you prior to the race. I will most likely be doing a shakeout run with the Semper Fi Fund the day before. Be great to say hi, be able to kind of cheer you on and wish you good luck before you set out to run the 50th running of the Marine Corps Marathon. Thanks for watching.